I'm Nima Rajan. Four of the nation's political party leaders will face off tonight in the first televised debate of the federal election campaign. The French debate on Quebec's TVA network comes at the midpoint of the campaign leading up to the September 20th vote. Taking part will be Liberal leader Justin Trudeau, the Conservatives' Erin O'Toole, the Bloc Québécois' Yves-François Blanchet, and the NDP's Jagmeet Singh. The Green Party's Annie Paul and Maxime Bernier of the People's Party were not invited to participate. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau is promising to enshrine abortion services in the Canada Health Act and bring in tougher measures to ban a variety of firearms. The pledges come in a Liberal re-election platform with $78 billion in new spending. This is more than 3 times the direct new revenues promised over the next 5 years. Erin O'Toole's Conservatives is outlining a plan to build key infrastructure, including public transit roads and 5G telecom networks. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh pledged to use federal lands to help ease Canada's housing crisis. Well, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce wants federal leaders to make critical minerals a fundamental part of the economic recovery. The Chamber says critical minerals must also be at the core of any strategy. This in order to transition to a low-carbon economy and mitigate the impact of climate change. The Chamber wants to see party leaders in the current federal election campaign present detailed plans regarding critical minerals. Canada is home to an estimated 15 million untapped tons of rare earth oxides. Canadian consumers may be getting a little less for their money at grocery stores these days due to so-called shrinkflation. Experts say food manufacturers are shrinking package sizes while keeping prices stable. Sylvain Charlebois, a food expert at Dalhousie University in Halifax, says shrinkflation helps food processors handle rising input or ingredient costs. While reducing package sizes isn't popular with consumers, he says it may have a positive impact on food waste. Well, meanwhile, food delivery service Skip the Dishes wants to add more to its plate. It's testing a new business model called Skip Express Lane that would sell household goods and groceries directly to customers. The delivery service's new offering has 2 locations in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and London, Ontario. Skip the Dishes says demand for convenience and grocery stores increased by 900% over the last year as pandemic restrictions saw people stay home. Some people forced to leave their homes near the western bank of BC's Okanagan Lake have been given the all-clear to return to their Valley of the Sun subdivision. Emergency officials still warn, though, that the White Rock Lake wildfire is continuing to burn out of control and all other nearby evacuation orders remain in place. The BC Wildfire Service reports there are still 215 current active fires burning across the province, including 15 considered as fires of note. Alberta's opposition NDP says it's time for the government to tell Albertans how they plan to address a rising 4th wave of the pandemic. The province reported 1,315 new COVID-19 cases yesterday. This is the highest one-day total since mid-May, when the peak of the last wave began to recede. Alberta has been averaging more than 1,000 new cases a day for the last week. The number of ICU cases has doubled in the last 10 days. Manitoba's Shared Health is condemning an anti-vaccine mandate protest outside the Health Sciences Centre as profoundly disrespectful. They are saying demonstrators aggressively harassed patients and staff for wearing masks. At one point, protesters walked out into traffic, blocking vehicles from passing. Shared Health says some patients canceled their appointments rather than approach the demonstrators standing near the entrance. Well, you can add Ontario to the growing list of provinces ushering in COVID-19 vaccine passport systems. Premier Doug Ford made the announcement Wednesday after weeks of saying that he wouldn't. But Mr. Ford admits he was forced to change his mind to ensure the pandemic's 4th wave of infections doesn't trigger another economic lockdown. Ontario's new vaccine certificate system will kick in on September 22nd. A similar vaccine card program was launched in Quebec on Wednesday, and BC will do the same on September 13th. Quebec Premier François Legault has welcomed Pierre Fitzgibbon back to cabinet after he withdrew in June because of ethics violations. Mr. Legault says Mr. Fitzgibbon will resume his role as economy minister. This after he sold his shares in 2 companies in order to comply with requirements laid out by the ethics commissioner. Beginning tomorrow, long-term care and community care staff in PEI who aren't fully vaccinated for COVID-19 will be tested every shift to a maximum of 3 times per week. Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Heather Morrison says staff are encouraged to get vaccinated, but if unvaccinated individuals follow testing and masking requirements, they can continue to work in the facilities. All right, stay with us. We will be right back after a short break on the Forum Daily. Canadians can expect grocery prices to climb even more due to severe drought in the western provinces. Dalhousie University expert Sylvain Charlebois says an average family could spend close to $700 more on food this year than they did last year. Ranchers who can't afford to feed their cattle are reducing the size of their herds, which is helping to drive up retail beef prices. Growing global demand for food, as well as the return of restaurant dining in the wake of COVID-19 public health restrictions, are also contributing to the surging prices. Well, joining us now to talk more on this is Dr. Sylvain Charlebois himself. Welcome to Forum Daily, sir.
Well, thank you.
Now, let's start with a brief overview of how much more the average family is expected to pay on food.
Well, back in December, our group released the 11th Canada's Food Price Report 2021. And at the time, in December, we were predicting the inflation rate for 2021 to be at about 5%. So $700 for an average family of 4. And that's basically what's going on right now due to weather patterns and, of course, COVID, which is the other added wild card this year. COVID is basically making logistics more expensive. Labor is more expensive as well. All these elements are catching up to consumers at the grocery store and at the restaurant, which is why we were predicting a rate of 5%, and we're still quite comfortable with our forecasts.
And how does a drought in Western Canada affect food prices around the country, Doctor?
Well, grains are negotiated around the world on world markets. And by the way, there were drought reports in Canada, but also from the United States and Russia. So the entire Northern Hemisphere was actually hard hit by droughts and heat waves. And to add more complexity to this, Europe was also hit by floods this year. And so harvests in the Northern Hemisphere won't be great. And so we're hoping that the Southern Hemisphere, and they're about to start their spring there, the harvest there will be much more prolific. Right now, we're looking at lower inventories. And when inventories are low, prices do go up.
So are specific food items becoming more expensive, or are prices rising in general?
Yeah, so the meat counter is certainly top of mind for a lot of people. Beef is up 10% already this year. Pork is up 5%. Chicken is still relatively stable. We are expecting increases for the entire meat trifecta. In fact, due to the fact that grains are more expensive, you need grains to feed animals. And right now, livestock producers are just getting rid of their animals prematurely, so because it's costing them too much to keep animals around. That's the reason what's going on. So we should actually hit the winter time with lower inventories when it comes to livestock. So that's making meat more expensive. The center of the store where there's a lot of processors are paying more for the ingredients. So they're gonna have to adjust their prices they charge to distributors, the companies we buy food from.
And you also mentioned that changing package sizes and shrinkflation are also an issue in tracking inflation. So can you tell us a little bit more on this and what exactly shrinkflation is?
Yeah, I know it makes a lot of people upset. Shrinkflation is essentially a strategy used by processors. They actually reduce quantities without changing prices, essentially. So instead of a bag of cookies at 500 grams, they would lower that amount to 450, 410, and keep the same price, essentially. And they actually will play around with the package, so you'll actually see some sort of an illusion. You'll have the illusion that you're still buying the same product, but you're not. And so that's really what shrinkflation is all about. And shrinkflation does occur when commodity prices do go up. So it did happen in 2008, in 2014, and now again in 2021.
And I guess the big question here is this a temporary issue, Doctor, or are these price increases here to stay?
Well, if you're hoping the prices will drop, think again. You just have to work a little bit harder to get some rebates. In fact, there's something that we noticed since the start of COVID is that there are a lot of unannounced, unadvertised discounts out there. So if you take the time to visit more than one grocery store, you could actually save a lot of money. But we're not expecting prices to drop. But things will likely calm down in the spring of 2022. But we are releasing our 12th edition Canada's Food Price Report in December, and you'll have more details then.
All right, we'll keep our eyes out for that. Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, thank you again for joining us on Forum Daily.
My pleasure.
All right, stay tuned. We take a deeper look at our federal party platforms and what they mean for taxpayers' wallets with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation's Franco Terrazzano up next. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. The Liberals have released their re-election platform, which is big on spending, but lacking any mention of balancing the federal budget. The platform cost adds $70 billion to the federal debt over the next 5 years. The Liberals say the debt to GDP ratio would be lower under this platform than what was projected in last spring's budget. The NDP and Conservatives released their platforms earlier in the campaign, and all three main federal party platforms include big spending promises. With us to unpack the cost of all these promises is Mr. Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hey, thanks for having me on today.
Now, before we get into these platforms, sir, can you give us a brief financial overview of the federal debt and what Canada collects in taxes each year?
Well, the federal government is already over $1 trillion in debt, which means that each Canadian is on the hook for about $29,000 in federal debt. And, under the Trudeau government status quo, we might not see a balanced budget for almost 5 decades. And if you look at all of the taxes that a Canadian family pays, the average Canadian family pays more to taxes than they pay for housing, clothing, and food combined.
All right, sir. Looking into these platforms now, the Liberal platform was released recently. So what is your analysis of this platform in a spending perspective?
Well, we're seeing billions of dollars in new spending. So essentially all we're hearing from the Liberals is more borrowing, but not a peep about when they're going to balance the budget. And if you look at Trudeau and the Liberals' track record, right, that comment about budgets balancing themselves, the broken promise in 2015 to balance the budget. And with this platform, it's a good bet that the Liberals may never balance the budget.
And what is your analysis of the Conservative platform, sir, when it comes to spending?
Well, at least the Conservatives are talking about balancing the budget, but even their plan to balance the budget within 10 years is incredible. The plan doesn't have targets for deficit reduction. It doesn't have many ways to actually find some savings, and it's not even costed. So essentially what we're hearing from O'Toole's Conservatives is, hey, trust us, and in 10 years we'll have done something good.
All right, sir. Now jumping to the NDP platform, how does that compare to the Liberals and Conservatives?
Well, the NDP's plan is essentially to raise taxes here, there, and everywhere. They want to raise income taxes on top earners. They want to raise business taxes. They want to impose a wealth tax. They want to impose a so-called excess profits tax and a bunch of other taxes. But even with all of those tax hikes, they still have no clue how they're going to balance the budget. And they want Canadians to think it's just going to be the wealthy or the big businesses who end up paying these taxes. But it's really going to be everyday Canadians who get hit with those taxes when we're at the till through higher prices and through less job opportunities.
All right, sir, just about 2.5 minutes left here. But what should taxpayers take away from each of the main federal party platforms here?
Well, it's that unfortunately these parties aren't taking deficits and the $1 trillion debt problem as serious as they should. Remember, this is a pocketbook issue. Each Canadian's already on the hook for $29,000 in federal government debt. Eventually, that has to come from taxpayers' pockets if they don't save some money. We're already spending billions of dollars every single year just on interest charges. And I think we should be asking ourselves, what kind of Canada do we want to leave for future generations? We're $29,000 in debt federally each now, but in 5 decades, under the status quo, that would be $67,000 per Canadian. And that would be just a huge tab that we'd be leaving to future generations of taxpayers.
All right, sir, a little over a minute here, but what kind of factors should our taxpayers consider when deciding on a candidate to vote on when it comes to the right choice for their wallets?
Well, I think there's three important questions that all taxpayers need to be asking our politicians when they come knocking on our door hoping to get our vote. The first question is, what are you going to do about the $1 trillion federal debt? The second question is, well, where are you going to find some savings in this bloated budget? And finally, very important question is, are you going to raise my taxes to pay for all of this overspending?
All right, Mr. Franco Terrazzano from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Always great having you on Forum Daily, sir. Thank you again for joining us today.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
All right, don't go away, everyone. We'll have a look at what's making news around the world coming up next, as Afghanistan is now facing a hunger crisis. More deaths are reported in New York City and New Jersey from Hurricane Ida, and India's Kashmir region is under lockdown after the death of a top separatist leader. These stories and more coming up next.
Hello, I'm Tony Clement. I'm the host of Boom and Bust, a business news and views show here at the News Forum. Every Monday to Friday from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern, that's 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. Pacific, we discuss the business news and views of the day, the economic issues that affect us all. We have guests coming from the political realm, from the economic realm, the business realm. Join us each day, Monday to Friday, as we discuss these very important issues. We'd love to have you along.
A senior UN official warns that food in Afghanistan could run out this month. That threatens to add a hunger crisis to the challenges facing the country's new Taliban rulers. Nearly one-third of the country's population of 38 million is facing emergency or crisis levels of food insecurity. Authorities say at least 14 deaths were reported in New York City and New Jersey as relentless rain from the remnants of Hurricane Ida sent the area into a state of emergency. The storm swept into New England and is continuing into Atlantic Canada. Subway stations and tracks became so flooded that the Metropolitan Transportation Authority suspended all service. Videos posted online showed subway riders standing on seats in cars filled with water. Indian authorities have cracked down on public movement and imposed a near-total communications blackout in the Kashmir region. This comes after the death of Saeed Ali Gilani, a top Kashmir separatist leader. Mr. Gilani died late Wednesday at the age of 92. His son, Nasim Gilani, told the Associated Press that authorities quietly buried his father under harsh restrictions. He says they would not allow his burial at the main martyrs' graveyard in Srinagar. The Press Trust of India reported that officials disallowed any mass funeral in anticipation of anti-India protests. Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has delivered his third State of the Nation address. He highlighted his campaign against government corruption and downplaying the work that remains to be done in the areas of security and reducing poverty. Nearly midway through his 6-year term, Mr. López Obrador remains popular. This despite stubbornly high levels of violence and rising inflation in an economy coming out of recession. Chinese regulators have ordered ride-hailing platforms to correct unfair market tactics. This comes amid a crackdown on the internet sector that has spooked investors and shaved billions off the valuations of some of China's biggest technology companies. 11 platforms were ordered by year's end to stop unfair competition tactics and practices such as recruiting unlicensed drivers. Japan opened its new digital agency on Wednesday. Japan's reliance on paperwork and fax data delayed financial subsidies and support for people during the pandemic, and it slowed the sharing of medical data about COVID-19 patients and vaccinations. It also hampered schools when they switched to online learning. The new agency has about 600 workers and aims to digitize administrative procedures in 31 areas and standardize systems used by municipalities within 5 years. Amazon is going on a major hiring spree with plans to add 55,000 new employee roles. About 40,000 of those jobs will be in the U.S., while other companies laid off workers during the pandemic. Amazon's workforce ballooned. This was due to increased demand from the shopping site. Amazon hired 500,000 people last year and currently employs more than 1.3 million worldwide. OPEC and its allies are adding more oil back to the market as demand recovers from the worst of the coronavirus pandemic. The oil-producing cartel and its allies agreed to add back 400,000 barrels of oil per day from October 1st. The group, known as OPEC Plus, is restoring deep cuts made last year. Lockdowns and travel restrictions caused fuel demand and prices to crater. The international team investigating the downing of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 over eastern Ukraine 7 years ago is appealing to Russians for information. They are asking Russians in the city of Kursk to come forward with information about the deployment of the missile that investigators say downed the plane. It killed all 298 people on board. Fighting has flared up between Yemen's pro-government forces and Houthi rebels in the oil-rich government stronghold of Marib province. At least 28 fighters were killed over the last 24 hours. Security officials from both sides and tribal leaders say that most of the fatalities were among the Iran-backed rebels assaulting the city of Rabaa. They spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to brief the media. Police in northwestern Nigeria say gunmen have attacked another remote school, kidnapping 73 students. Wednesday's attack prompted authorities to close all primary and secondary schools across Zamfara state. The latest abductions come just days after Nigerians celebrated the release of 3 different groups of young hostages. More than 1,000 students have been kidnapped from schools in northern Nigeria since December. An international effort is underway to rescue members of Afghanistan's girls' national soccer team and their families over fears of reprisal by the Taliban. The effort, known as Operation Soccer Balls, suffered a setback last week after a suicide bombing at the airport in Kabul. The concern is that the girls will likely be in danger because they participated in athletics, which is banned by the Taliban. There have been at least 5 failed attempts to rescue the girls in recent days. I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily.